So my understanding of their psychology is that they're resentful, they're low down on the status hierarchy, they're not attractive to potential mates, they're not necessarily very popular, they don't have a lot of hope for attaining any of that in the future. So they're very, very frustrated by that lowly position. And then they can have these fantasies. It's like the same kind of fantasy that a suicidal teenager will have, because the suicidal teenager will often fantasize about as if he's a spirit that will be there at his funeral, with everybody huddled around the coffin, including the boys and girls who rejected him, expressing their sorrow for the mistreatment that he suffered. The parents are doing the same thing. And he sees this in a very dramatic sense. There's nothing they want more than attention. Well, so let's dive right into it. I'll offer some ideas about what I think is motivating this, but I want to hear what you've written so much about, well, as we can see in the background, crisis of masculinity, the crisis among boys, and then maybe zero in to the issue of what's happening with these mass homicides committed almost always by young men. Almost invariably.
We looked at the access to guns as an issue. We looked at toxic politics. We look at family values are really bad in this generation in particular. We look at violence in the media. We look at violence in video games. We look at mental illness. Obviously, anyone who does a mass shooting has a mental illness problem. And then you ask a different question, which is, wait a minute, our daughters are exposed to the same replacement theory style hatred, the same access to the same guns in the same homes, and they're the same family values, the same toxic politics, the same violence in video games, the same violence in the media. And our daughters are not doing the mass shootings, and they're not doing very little shootings, period. Our sons are. And so it should be obvious to us that there's something happening with our sons. And in fact, there is. And it's not just happening in the United States, it's happening globally. And it's happening not in all countries, it's happening in all developed nations. In the 53 largest developed nations, boys are falling behind in every academic subject, but especially reading and writing. And reading and writing, as you know, are the two biggest predictors of success or failure. Our daughters who graduate from college are not usually looking for a boy who has been a dropout in either high school or college. Girls tend to be attracted more to winners, and boys who are dropout are also are perceived as losers.
That's a critical point there that we don't want to gloss over. Girls tend to be attracted to winners, tend to prefer boys who are 4 to 5 years older, and that's pretty stable cross-culturally, and that they tend to be attracted to males who are their equivalent in terms of socioeconomic success or above. For boys, it's almost the only determinant of their attractiveness. So for a boy to be a loser on the, let's say, competition front, especially given extreme female sexual choosiness, I was looking at data today that showed that women on dating sites rate 80% of men as below average. And whereas men find 60% of the women they look at on online dating sites acceptably attractive. Women find 4.5% of them acceptably attractive.
When a boy is feeling like he's being rejected sexually and relationship-wise, and is feeling like his teachers are not speaking well of him because he's not doing well in class, and his parents are maybe speaking about his brother or sister with pride in their voice, but sort of leaving him out, he begins to feel this enormous vulnerability. But also that vulnerability is expressed by anger as well.
Bitterness, resentment, desire for revenge. Yep, all of that. And fantasies that emerge as a consequence of that too. Fantasies of revenge and the acquisition of status.
And these boys, and so they sort of they may turn to guns as a way of saying, I'm strong. I'm not the loser that you think I am, as did in Texas. And not only did he show the guns on TikTok and on Instagram, but also try to tease Anita, a girl that he thought he knew who didn't know him at all, basically. And he was hoping to sort of get her attention by saying, I'm going to be doing something important. Watch out for me.
Oh, I didn't know it had become that detailed in relationship to a relationship.
Yeah. So, well, she would say it was not a relationship.
Right. It was a fantasy on his part.
It was a fantasy on his part for sure. And so, as I started studying this, I saw that it is not just the boy crisis, but that the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. And so when we look at the 6 mass shooters in the 21st century who have been school shooters, all 6 of those mass shooters who have been school shooters in the 21st century, all 6 of them for whom we know the family background, every single one of them were dad-deprived boys, including in Texas. And the stories are so amazingly similar. The dads are not involved. The mothers become involved. They care for the children a great deal, but the boy feels he has no no structure, no purpose, no discipline.
Okay, so these boys that let's look at the more extreme case for a minute. These school shooters. So my understanding of their psychology is that they're resentful. They're low down on the status hierarchy. They're not attractive to potential mates. They're not necessarily very popular. They don't have a lot of hope for attaining any of that in the future. So they're very, very frustrated by that lowly position. And that makes them angry. It makes them resentful. Then it starts to generate compensatory fantasies, which would be, well, I'll do something. I'll show them. I'm going to be famous. Everybody's going to know who I am. Mm-hmm. And then they can drift into these violent fantasies. Sometimes that's motivated also by thoughts of direct revenge because they've been bullied and they've been pushed around. And so they have reasons to be angry, let's say. No, I'm not saying any of this is justified, by the way. I'm just saying how it works. And then they brood for months, and years, developing these fantasies of violence. But more importantly, focusing on the consequences for notoriety of the violent act. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I've been suggesting to people who are interested in this sort of thing is, especially people on the media side, is that they don't use the shooters' names. They don't report the shooters' names. Mm-hmm. And I think because the thing about the mass shooters in particular is they've learned how to hijack the media world to provide themselves with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of free publicity, to draw attention to their manifestos, for example. But also, and then they can have these fantasies. It's like the same kind of fantasy that a suicidal teenager will have, because the suicidal teenager will often fantasize about as if he's a spirit that will be there at his funeral, with everybody huddled around the coffin, including the boys and girls who rejected him, expressing their sympathy for the way that he behaved, expressing their sorrow for the mistreatment that he suffered. The parents are doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. And he sees this in a very dramatic sense. And there's an elaboration of that on the violence side. And they want to be notorious. And you ask why, and why boys, not girls? And the answer is, well, success to boys is linked with popularity with girls, for example, in a way that it's simply not linked for girls with boys. And it's a huge difference. If there's anybody out there, any young guy, for example, who's watching this, who's been having vengeful fantasies and who has been developing and toying with fantasies of revenge and who is feeling isolated and lonesome and oppressed and isolated and is starting to spin up fantasies of violence in revenge, and you'll know that if you're one of these people, like, find someone to talk to. There's better ways you can deal with this. And you're young, you're 16, you're 17. You don't have to be doomed, You got your whole life ahead of you. And maybe just getting out of the place that you're in where you're unpopular might do it for you. You can move to somewhere else and be a new person. There's all sorts of pathways in life. And so you don't have to explosively demonstrate your competence, in a single vengeful, violent act. There are better ways to deal with the world. And you might have reason to be bitter and vengeful, but there are better paths. There are better paths forward. So have enough sense to reach out to somebody. Find someone, a teacher, a principal, someone, a policeman if it has to be. Someone.